Hail and well met Slayers of Giants. As those of you who've been watching the show know, a couple of weeks ago I had to record in my car because I was late in getting the chapter written and I wasn't prepared. Well, I want you to know this week I am also recording in my car, but not because I'm running late, because last week's show had such terrible sound quality in my apartment that I decided I needed to go out and find a different place to record. I've been trying to keep my exact geographic location kind of mysterious because, some of you know, I was receiving a lot of harassment and death threats online, and so I've been, now that I've moved to a new city, I want to keep that a big secret. So you will never guess where I am recording. I'm just going to keep that a secret, but I parked my car in a place where there is not traffic noise, no train, no metro. So hopefully the sound quality will be better this week. So let's give this a whirl, shall we? Here we are with Tilting at Windmills, my serial novel, and this is Chapter 8. And remember, this is a draft. I'll be very grateful for your feedback throughout, so please comment away on whatever platform you're finding this and become a patron of my Patreon or subscribe to my Substack so you'll get a little reminder each week when a new chapter comes out. Here's Tilting at Windmills, Chapter 8, The Bolt of Lightning. We are all spoiled by objects and systems which simply function properly. For example, for nearly 20 years, Benjamin owned a washer and dryer, which washed a full load of clothes, then got them completely dry. At no point in that long period did he stop to think, boy, I am so lucky the washer can wash clothes, and the dryer gets them dry. Then, when he moved to Spain, for the first few weeks his family lived in hotels and Airbnbs while waiting to get the necessary residency to rent an apartment, so they had to go to laundromats to wash their clothes, the new bedding they'd purchased upon their arrival, and their bath towels. If you've never been in a situation where you regularly go to laundromats, well, you might imagine the inconvenience. You'd be shocked at the mounting cost. Within 5 or 6 visits, Benjamin had spent more than it would have cost to purchase a dryer, and within 15 visits, less than a washer and dryer combined. Suddenly and belatedly, the washer and dryer back home received the deep appreciation they'd always been due. And once Benjamin and his family got into an apartment and had a washer and dryer, they felt all the ways these appliances were inferior. Houses in the United States are ridiculously large, leading to urban sprawl, but the tiny apartments in Europe, while perfectly satisfactory in most ways, do not have the room for huge appliances, so the washing machine could only do tiny loads. And the dryer, because it was not connected to the water system, had a tray underneath, which had to be pulled out and dumped after each load. Many loads had to be run twice in order to get dry. The small living room was filled with a drying rack for their comforters and blankets, which couldn't get fully dry no matter how many cycles they went through. So often, this is how we learn when something works. Similarly, Benjamin hadn't appreciated democracy. Like the washer and dryer, it worked well for him, a cishet white guy, and he didn't recognize how many people around him didn't have functioning washers and dryers or the benefits of democracy, until that system facilitated the rise of a fascist administration in his country. Sensitive to where fascist governance leads because of his Jewish heritage and the death threats he regularly received for his political activism, and married to a bisexual neurodivergent woman and having a non-binary trans kid who recognized all the threats they faced for their identities, he moved to Spain. They had a plan to survive there. It was a crap plan that never would have worked, but they tried. Now, it's not this narrator's place to tell Benjamin's wife's story, but it's important to understand it in order to comprehend everything that led up to Benjamin's break with reality and the birth of Rolando de Santa Maria del Pia, Barcelona. Suffice it to say, Benjamin's wife experienced something akin to Benjamin's realization about the washer and dryer and democracy upon her return to the United States, when Benjamin followed through on his plan to deposit her in Portland and continue on to Cleveland. After arriving in Cleveland, Benjamin, with the help of his parents, got a car. His father went with him to multiple dealerships and endured the uncomfortable drudgery of witnessing Benjamin haggle over nickels and dimes with multiple eager and helpful salespeople until they finally found a car that cost about half of what they'd expected to spend. It was similar to the one Benjamin sold before leaving for Spain, a Kia Sorento replacing a Honda CR-V, and about the same advanced age. The new old Kia had traveled many more thousands of miles than the Honda, but Benjamin was also a much higher mileage individual than he'd been only a year earlier, and the new car was black, Benjamin's favorite color, so he was very pleased with the purchase. One of the advantages of owning a car, which became immediately apparent but whose effect on Benjamin's life wouldn't be fully felt for a few days, was that it allowed him to escape the close quarters of his parents' duplex, to engage in long conversations with his soon-to-be ex without enduring the sub-zero temperatures of Cleveland's cold snap. The new old car didn't have heated seats, a luxury he did not care about until they came unbidden in his Honda, and which he now considered, if not necessary, then a far more important part of the value of car ownership than he would have imagined before. Luckily, he saved about $5,000 by choosing an older, higher-mileage Kia without heated seats, and then plopped a $25 seat heater into the front seat, one of the better financial decisions he'd ever made. So now he could sit in heated comfort in his new car in his parents' driveway and talk for hours and hours with his soon-to-be ex-wife. Those conversations turned out to be about as momentous for Benjamin as Rolando and Serge's conversation with Iriel Honan on the shores of Lake Erie, changing the direction of his life just as theirs changed the direction of their journey and upended Serge's entire identity. Days earlier, Serge had been an Uber driver, mostly shuttling people from the Portland airport to the hotels nearby or downtown. He'd served as a squire so briefly, he didn't have much of an idea of what a squire was supposed to do, and then, in one shocking conversation, he was given a magical sword and promoted to full knighthood, then only slightly demoted to knight in training to satisfy Rolando's objection. The shock of the change overwhelmed his immune system, and the next morning he awoke with a fever and a sore throat. Rolando felt Serge's forehead like his mother had when he was a child, resting the back of his hand on Serge's sweaty skin, and then declared, "We must find you a physician." Serge, still bundled under the thin hotel comforter, looked up at his former master, now teacher. "I'm sure it's just a cold. We should start heading to Chicago, and I'll get better in a couple of days." "Well, I admire your bravery and fortitude, Sir Sanchez. A fever is not something with which to trifle. You are currently locked in combat with an illness. As you will learn, adding more combatants to a battle makes the likelihood of success more remote, for every new combatant brings with him a level of unpredictability. If we must fight another giant, I do not want you battling an army of bacteria or a phalanx of viruses at the same time. Let us find you a physician and an apothecary who can provide you the right medicine, and you will be, as you Americans say, as erect as rain." "Right as rain," Serge corrected. "This word right has far too many distinct meanings in English, in my opinion," Rolando mused. "Opposite of left, correct, a political debt owed to all, orderly, politically conservative, to straighten, an angle of 90 degrees, to be mentally well, immediately, done properly, a synonym for very, and the same sound as the act of communicating on paper, and a religious ceremony, it is too much." "You forgot the spelling that means to make, like shipwright or a playwright." "I am heartened to see you still have your wits about you. Come, we will go right to the doctor's office right away, and they will fix you right up and write you a prescription for the right kind of medicine, as is your right." Serge chuckled as he rose slowly from the bed. "Right, and then I could write to a playwright who could write a scene showing the right to bless the doctor." Rolando took a step back, set his feet at the proper 90-degree angle of a fencer, the right angle, and poked at Serge with his sheathed cane. "Right, and if the playwright writes the right play, if it is not banned by a right-winger who is not in his right mind, it might reach the right audience and become a right and proper hit on Broadway." "I surrender," Serge cried. He allowed Rolando to escort him to the car, and he even let Rolando drive, but he played navigator, directing the Spaniard to an urgent care center rather than an individual doctor's office or a hospital's emergency room. They found one in a strip mall between a Dollar Tree and a nail salon. Inside, a security guard greeted them at the door. A heavy-set white guy in his mid-20s, the guard had a red beard cut even shorter than Rolando's neatly trimmed Euro beard, but ending not beneath the jawline, but in the middle of a roll of fat on the young man's neck. He ran a wand over each of them, ignoring Rolando's cane, and surprisingly unconcerned about the way the device squawked as it passed over the pockets of Rolando's coat. But he was unwilling to trust the wand to detect a gun in Serge's belt, and demanded a quick pat-down. Serge complied, unsure if the suspicion originated in his race, his youth, his gender, or his build. Serge wasn't particularly strong-looking, and his average height didn't intimidate anyone, but his soccer player physique, taken with his other identities, ran headfirst into some people's preconceived biases. He didn't have the energy to be particularly offended, and he was glad he'd left his sword safely in the rental's trunk. Rolando guided him to a seat in the reception area and assured him he could make the arrangements. The older knight presumed his position and wealth would open doors because they always had, but he'd never done battle with the American healthcare system. A beautiful Nigerian-American woman with a blinding smile greeted him from behind a glass barrier and asked for the patient's name and insurance information.
The patient is my friend and colleague, Sergio Sanchez. He has a fever of some kind. I will be paying for his care.
Does he have health insurance through his work?
Through his... And then he remembered, oh yes, I have heard of this strange American phenomena. No, he has recently taken a new position which does not offer health insurance.
Uninsured, the woman said as she clicked on her computer. So he would be a new patient to us. Does he have a primary care physician?
Rolando asked Serge, then returned. He is from Oregon, from the city of Portland.
Okay, well, our medical records are not going to connect, and it would take days to get them sent over, so we'll start him as a new patient. But without insurance, it's going to be a few weeks until we have an opening, and he's going to have to pay out of pocket.
Can I pay you now?
Rolando said, pulling the wad of cash out from one of his coat's interior pockets. No, we can't accept cash, sir, and you can't prepay for an appointment. You also can't pay for him because he's not a family member, but you could give him the money to deposit into an account so he could pay us with a credit card. However, I'll warn you, without insurance, it costs a lot. Or, it costs less than we bill the insurance company, but a lot more than a copay. An extra because someone who is uninsured is out of network. He would get a discount at our pharmacy if he had insurance through our in-network providers, but without that, the medicine will cost more too. So if he can get insurance through his employer before his appointment, or purchase a policy on the healthcare marketplace, that may be cheaper than those out-of-pocket costs.
Rolando blinked in disbelief. But he is sick, and I can pay for his care. We cannot wait weeks for an appointment.
If it's an emergency, you may have to go to the emergency room.
But what if the situation is only urgent, and he needs care? Could we not accomplish that at urgent care?
I'm sorry, sir. Without a general practitioner assigned by his insurance company, he will need to wait for an appointment for his intake. Sometimes we have openings during the day, but we're very busy today because we had 2 patients come in with serious injuries. The receptionist was not allowed to tell Rolando the specifics, but they would only have shocked him more. A 14-year-old boy had come in with a gunshot wound in his foot. His father had asked him to hold his pistol during a soccer game, and while watching the game and walking around the indoor facility, he'd nearly dropped the gun into his pants. Grabbing for it, he'd shot himself neatly between the first and second metatarsal, a wound which didn't require an emergency room, which was lucky because the patient's father didn't want to take him anywhere that would ask too many questions. If this seems unbelievable, it should be noted it would not have surprised Benjamin one bit. This exact same injury was sustained by one of his former students back when he'd been a high school English teacher, and in identical circumstances. The second injury involved something the patient had shoved up his butt, which had broken there and required minor surgery to extract. It is impossible to know which kind of injury is more common in the United States because gun rights activists have banned tracking gunshot injury data since it could be used as an argument against people who have managed to shove their heads up their own asses and broken off something important inside. Rolando turned to Serge and began speaking in an even tone, but his voice slowly rose to a shout.
It seems they cannot offer you urgent care here in this place called urgent care because healthcare is not a civil right in this cursed country, and the bank will not profit if I paid with cash, and people cannot pay directly for the care of a friend because that would be too much like socialized medicine, and the insurance company wants its pound of flesh and wants to make sure you get your medicine from their own pharmacy to make sure their own pharmaceutical company gets their choice cut of you as well.
He looked over the receptionist's shoulder, at the 3 other transcriptionists working in billing, then at the security guard who was sauntering over to him as he shouted,
"There are more people working here who are not medical professionals than there are doctors and nurses."
He looked directly at the security guard.
"In my country, when you go to a doctor's office, there is a doctor. Just a doctor, maybe a nurse. At the hospital, there are no security guards. Maybe a single receptionist who directs you to a doctor's office and reports all the patients to the single government agency which administers everything. And do you know how long we wait? People complain about how long it takes to see some kinds of specialists. But compared to the wait times here in your country for people without insurance, do you know how long their wait times are?"
"Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to leave," the guard said.
"How long? Infinite, because they are dead. Include those in your wait time averages. Multiply by infinity, young man."
He pointed his cane at the security guard's chest.
"Do they teach you how to do that kind of mathematics in your schools here? Statistical analysis which includes infinity as a variable?"
"Okay, sir, that's it. You're out." The guard reached forward to grab Rolando's wrist. Rolando stepped sideways and whacked the man on the hand with his cane. Serge leapt up. "Whoa, careful, don't hurt him." "I'm just escorting him out, sir," the guard said. "I'm going to need you to sit down." "I'm protecting you, you moron. You have no idea what he could do to you." Serge tried to wedge himself between the men and guide Rolando out. The security guard placed his hand on the grip of the gun in the holster at his waist. "Sir, I said sit down. When I tell you to sit down, you sit down. Do you understand me?" Serge stepped back and raised his hands. "Whoa, okay, we're leaving." Now it was the guard's turn to shout. "No, you're fucking not. You're going to sit your Chicano ass down when I tell you to, and this old guy is going to walk out of here, and I'm calling the cops. And if you so much as move a muscle before they arrive, I will defend myself with lethal force. Do you understand?" And then the guard crumpled to the floor in a heap. "Oh my God!" the receptionist shouted, looking at Serge. "What did you do to him?" Rolando stepped toward the glass, and the woman quailed, but he spoke in an even voice. "It is not an emergency, madam. The man only requires care urgently." Then he looked at Serge. "Let us go before the authorities arrive. I can only perform that particular spell 1 time per day." Serge, despite his illness, tried to run to the car while also staying with Rolando, the confusing compromise causing him to jog, sometimes jogging in place, while Rolando walked calmly across the icy lot. "Did you kill him?" Serge Shout whispered. "No, he is asleep. Think of it as a kind of projected narcoleptic reaction." "They're going to call the cops." "They will try, yes. But every time they attempt to push the buttons on the phone, a certain talented raven will poke them in the backs of their hands with his beak. I expect they will sustain more injuries than the guard. We have plenty of time, though not enough for this cursed country's medical system. Come, we will find you medicine in a different way." In the car, Rolando dialed a number with a +34 prefix and spoke in an archaic form of Castellano to an interlocutor Serge didn't know, who had a voice which made him sound more than 100 years old. Rolando had been making regular reports to Garibald of Gaul, and now his contact in Madrid gave him the name and address of another magic user in the city. They drove southeast to the other side of town, then out to a suburb called Chagrin Falls. Yes, that really is the name of a Cleveland suburb, though they don't pronounce it the way you'd expect. When Benjamin learned how locals pronounce the name of the township, he projected embarrassment over humiliation on their behalf because of the missed comedic opportunity, and because he had chagrin to spare. No clear urban-rural barrier identified the space between Cleveland and the township, the aforementioned sprawl of overlarge houses blending one neighborhood into the next. Serge's phone's maps program directed them to an old stone church, which had been repurposed to accommodate local businesses. The main floor had offices and a public meeting space of some kind, but a sign directed them to an entrance around the side and a ramp leading down to the former church's basement. A sign above the exterior door, written in a heavy metal script one would not expect to find on a church, said Blue Devil Tattoo. As they got out of the car, standing in the bitter cold, Serge felt the sweat of his fever turning to steam and escaping like his fogging breath. "Am I hallucinating, or are you taking me to a tattoo parlor for medicine?" "My contact tells me the proprietor is secretly an apothecary of magical potions." Serge remembered something. "Didn't you say you carry a potion of healing? Would that work?" "It is for injuries sustained in battle, not illness, and I keep it for emergencies," Rolando explained. "It might have assuaged some of your symptoms temporarily, but you need something specifically brewed for your fever. An apothecary will know what you need." Rolando held up his cane. "I think you should bring your sword along, Sir Sanchez. If we are to present ourselves to someone knowledgeable about the ways of magic, you should introduce yourself as a knight-errant in training, and use your full title. This is how you will begin to cement your reputation amongst the magical community." Serge, struggling through the haze of his sickness, frowned in concentration. "Shit, I can't remember my full title. Of the Town of Eels, Guardian of Justice, and what was the last part?" "You haven't come up with that yet. Just say, Guardian of Justice and Servant of the Lady of the Great Lake." "It's such a long name," Serge whined. "I'm too sick for such a long name, Rolando. It's too heavy." "I know, good Sir Sanchez," Rolando said, taking his arm like a gentleman escorting a date, then squeezing once hard in a European gesture of non-romantic browiness. This would have made a healthy Serge uncomfortable with the physical intimacy, but he was surprisingly comforted by it in his illness. Serge opened the SUV's large back door, grabbed his sword by the middle of the scabbard, and gave a nervous look in both directions before pulling it out of the car. There was no law against carrying a sword from a car into a tattoo parlor, of course, But there's also no law against wearing a large rotting fish as a hat, yet it might also lead to questioning looks. Serge liked the hefty badass blade, but for the first time he envied Rolando's subtle cane sword. They crossed the street and made their way carefully down the handicapped-accessible ramp, holding on to the handrail because the scattered salt had lost its battle with the thick layer of ice which had built up in the shade of the church. The handrail, aluminum painted burgundy, would have stuck to exposed skin, and it froze through their gloves, but they pinched with all their might as their feet tried to escape them on the ice. So when they stepped into the parlor, the door ringing a bell as it swung open and closed, their attention went first to the warmth, then the framed images of the artist's work, hung close together on every wall rising up to the room's high ceiling, which extended halfway above street level. Some of the pieces were traditional designs, retro pin-up girls, Viking knots, and vaguely oriental tigers, but many were symbols the likes of which Serge had never seen before. It was only as they turned slowly, admiring all the images, that they noticed the man sitting silently, not behind the counter near the door as one might expect, but on his stool next to the empty, cushioned table where clients reclined while he did his work on their flesh. He was arranging the needles and small vials of ink on a stainless steel shelf that hung on an arm above his lap, the tattoo gun resting amidst the laid-out items there. He wore a light blue sleeveless tank top that almost perfectly matched the color of the rubber gloves on his hands. The lack of sleeves made Serge shiver despite the room's dialed-up heat, and then Serge noticed his basketball shorts, white with blue trim. Serge's NBA bias made him guess at the Washington Wizards, then the Orlando Magic, before he noticed they advertised a college team, the Duke University Blue Devils, of course. The shorts were long, even for modern basketball style, coming down just over the knee. Knee. Singular. Looking under the metal tray, Serge noted the man had one leg. The other must have ended somewhere in the shorts because the long shorts draped over any visible nub. Simultaneously more exceptional than the missing leg and more fitting for the environs, every square inch of the man's exposed skin, his shoulders and arms, the shin visible beneath the long shorts and the one high-top sneaker, his chest and neck, all of his face and his bald head, all of him, was covered in tattoos. Not a solid, even color, as was coming into vogue among some die-hard tattoo fans, nor an amalgamation of tattoos of different sizes blending one into the next, but a grid of small symbols, each one an inch high and an inch wide, packed tightly together in a honeycomb of hexagons. The symbols were the same glyphs Serge had noticed in many of the large prints on the walls, complex letters or pictograms from some language Serge couldn't identify. In tattoo form, they were not the black and white of the framed images, but the dark blue that tattoos traditionally fade to all too quickly. Packed so closely together on their human canvas, they made the man look like he had mottled blue skin.
"Welcome,"
he said, still looking down at the tools on his tray.
"What can I help you guys with today?"
His voice was low and gravelly, with a hint of the clipped, precise diction of a native Persian speaker.
"Well met, good sir," Rolando intoned. "I am Rolando de Santa Maria del Pi of Barcelona, knight-errant, and this is—"
Before Rolando could start Serge's name and new title, the tattoo artist grabbed his tattoo gun and pointed it at them. The knights didn't know how to react to a tattoo gun 10 feet away, but they instinctively held up their swords. The artist pulled the trigger. The tattoo gun made its usual whirring sound, and all three men waited for something to happen. The pace of the needle increased, and the buzzing raised in pitch until it was almost a tea kettle keening. And then a bolt of lightning shot out of the end, aimed directly for Rolando's chest. But when the lightning neared him, far faster than anyone could react, even unconsciously, to its approach, it curved, arcing into Serge's raised sword. Though still in its scabbard, the magic blade, Baganawatig, absorbed the electricity almost completely, so only a few sparks danced and chittered among the leaves of the tree wrought in silver on the scabbard. Serge felt the handle vibrate, but he wasn't electrocuted at all. For the briefest moment, all three men stared at Serge and Baganawatig, eyes wide. Then the tattoo artist revealed he was not a human at all, by launching up off his stool and floating into the far upper corner of the room, his back curved against the ceiling. The high-top sneaker had vanished completely, and the Duke basketball shorts merged with his lower appendage, which was not a single leg, but a wisp of cloudy smoke descending from his seemingly solid torso. The blue symbols which covered his body glowed in the shadowed corner of the room, pulsing slightly as he cried, "Please don't kill me! I'll give you whatever you want!" At that exact instant, Benjamin received an email from his soon-to-be ex-wife. Their long car conversations about the way they intended to maintain their friendship had seemed to be trending in a positive direction, and then, like the Djinn's bolt of lightning, the email lanced towards Benjamin's heart. The text explained that his wife had come out of a therapy session having made the decision that maintaining any kind of relationship while Benjamin attempted to move on with his life, interacting with him while he started dating other women, and pretending she wasn't consumed by grief, would be too painful. And like the Djinn's blast, the email missed its mark. Suddenly, Benjamin discovered the anger he'd been denying. It too quivered in his hands, ready to finally be unsheathed. If you're excited about this project, please subscribe on YouTube or like and share on TikTok or Reels or whatever app you're on now. And if you're willing to support me as I craft this novel in serial form, please consider supporting my Substack or Patreon. Each week I'll give a shout out to some of those patrons. This week I'm thanking Patreon patrons Adam Lipscomb, the poet who wrote the collections The Gift of Forgetting and Other Poems and Songs of Love and Loss, Patreon patron Carrie, and patron Rebecca Wells Phillips, author of Hurricane Helene, Resiliency After the Storm. Thank you all for your support. If any of you listeners are creators and have something to plug, please email NotAPipePublishing at NotAPipePublishing@gmail.com. See you back here next week for Chapter 9 of Tilting at Windmills. Teaser: sometimes an angry confrontation doesn't lead where you might expect. Sometimes it turns into something much sweeter. So join us for Chapter 9.